Dr. Henry Chun stood at the observation window of the research outpost on Vethra, watching the alien city below. The towers of the Cephal civilization stretched upward like crystal spears, reflecting light in ways that human buildings never could. He had been studying this species for 3 years, learning their language and understanding their culture. The Cephal were old, very old. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Henry had always believed that humans belonged out here, among the stars. Today, he was bringing proof. His 7-year-old daughter Emma played with blocks in the corner of his living quarters, unaware that she was about to meet one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The Cephal looked nothing like humans. They were tall, almost 8 feet, with skin that shifted between silver and blue. Their eyes were large and dark, and they moved with an unusual grace. To Emma, they would look like beings from a storybook, Henry thought. But they were real, and they were hosting humanity's first major trade agreement with an advanced civilization. The conference room was cold. The Cephal preferred lower temperatures than humans, and Henry had to wear a light jacket. Emma sat beside him, swinging her legs below the table, bored. The Cephal negotiators did not acknowledge her. To them, she was a distraction, something that did not belong in serious business. The lead negotiator was named Vorth. He was ancient by human standards, nearly 200 years old. He had seen countless species rise and fall. Humans were new to him, interesting perhaps, but not important. As he spoke about trade routes and resource exchanges, his tone made it clear that he saw humans as minor players in a much larger game. "Your species has limited technology," Vorth said flatly. "We question why we should risk our resources on your people." Henry kept his voice steady. "Our determination and speed of development set us apart. In just 50 years of spaceflight, we've already reached." The building shook. It was a small tremor at first, but then came another, more violent. The lights flickered. Emma grabbed Henry's arm, frightened. Vorth and the other Cephal stood up immediately, their movements quick and precise. They had experienced this before. Attack. "Stay down," one of the Cephal said, moving toward the door. There was no emotion in his voice, only command. The building shook again. This time, Henry heard the sound of explosions. Outside the windows, he could see flashes of light. Ships were firing on the outpost. Real weapons. Real destruction. Vorth spoke into a device at his wrist, his words in the Cephal language, too fast for Henry to follow. The other negotiators moved quickly, backing toward a reinforced corridor. One of them looked at Henry. "Come, your kind is not equipped for this." Henry grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her up. "We need to go, now." They rushed toward the corridor, but more explosions cut them off. A section of the ceiling collapsed where they had just been standing. Henry turned, looking for another way out. Emma was crying, holding tight to his hand. He had made a terrible mistake bringing her here. The atrium ahead was open to the sky, and through it, Henry could see the source of the attack. A dark ship was descending through the planet's atmosphere, firing as it came. Henry did not know which faction was attacking or why. He only knew that his daughter was in danger. Behind him, the Cephal were moving with military precision. They had security forces now, armed with weapons that looked like nothing from human science fiction. But the attackers seemed to have information. The targeting was specific, focused. Someone had planned this. Henry pulled Emma toward a side passage, away from the main fighting. The outpost was large, with many corridors. If he could find the secure sector, there would be a communication device. He could call for help from the main Cephal city. That was when he heard the child scream. It was not Emma. Henry turned and saw a young Cephal, barely more than a juvenile, running through the chaos. Behind the young alien, several armed figures in dark armor were advancing. They were hunting this Cephal, he realized. This was not random violence. Someone wanted this particular young alien dead. The young Cephal's name was Kale. Henry would learn this later. For now, he only knew that he was watching a being about the same age as Emma being hunted like an animal. Kale ran directly toward Henry and Emma. Their eyes met for a moment. In that moment, something changed. Kale could have kept running, could have tried to escape on his own. Instead, he made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. The armed figures raised their weapons, targeting the young Cephal. Kale did not hesitate. He changed direction, running toward Emma and Henry, putting himself between the child and the danger. He was not large. He was young and not yet fully grown. He had no real chance against the attackers, but he came anyway. Henry shouted Emma's name and pulled her behind him, his body acting on pure instinct. Kale reached them, and without a word, he turned to face the armed figures. His body shook with fear, but he stood firm. The weapons fired. Not at Emma or Henry, but at Kale. The young Cephal fell, blood dark against his silver skin. He had taken the shot that was meant to kill Emma. Everything after that happened in seconds. The Cephal security forces suddenly appeared, weapons blazing. The armed figures scattered, running back toward their ship. Within moments, the attack was over. The dark ship pulled away from the outpost and disappeared into the upper atmosphere. But Kale lay on the ground, bleeding, his body still positioned between Emma and the danger. Henry knelt down immediately. "Stay with her," he told Kale, pointing to Emma. The young Cephal's eyes moved toward the human child, even through the pain. There was something in that look. Not regret. Understanding, maybe. He had made his choice, and he did not regret it. The Cephal medical team arrived within minutes. They moved Kale carefully onto a stretcher, speaking in their own language, their tone urgent. One of them looked at Henry with what might have been shock or confusion. A young Cephal protecting a human child. It was not normal. It was not expected. V.O. Arth appeared, looking at Kale being carried away, then back at Henry. "Your daughter is unharmed?" he asked. "Because of him?" Henry said, pointing at Kale. "He saved her life." Vorth said nothing, but something in his ancient eyes changed. A single action, one moment of compassion from a young Cephal, had shifted something in the oldest civilization in the galaxy. They would not know the full weight of this moment yet, but it was coming. Henry held Emma close as she cried. The outpost burned around them, but his daughter was alive, and it was because someone had chosen to be brave and kind in the worst moment of all. The message from Vethra took 4 days to reach Earth. In that time, Henry Chun had not left the Cell medical facility. He sat in a waiting room, watching Emma sleep curled up on a bench beside him. The Cephal had allowed him to stay, though they made it clear this was unusual. Human presence in their medical centers was not common practice. Kale had survived surgery. The Cephal medicine was far beyond human science. The wounds that would have killed a human 10 times over were being healed with technology that looked like magic to Henry. But the young Cephal was not out of danger. He was in recovery, his body healing, but the infection risk was still high. When the official report reached Earth, it went directly to the United Nations Security Council. Dr. Henry Chun, a respected xenobiologist, had sent detailed information about the attack, about Kale's actions, and about what it meant. The message was simple but powerful. A member of an advanced alien species had sacrificed his own safety for a human child. General Patricia Morrison was the newly appointed head of the Global Defense Initiative. She was 62 years old and had spent her entire life in military service. She had expected to spend her final years managing old wars and old conflicts. But as she read Henry's message, she felt something shift inside her. This was not about weapons or tactics. This was about something bigger. The Security Council met in an emergency session. The representatives from America, Russia, China, Europe, and other major powers sat around the table. Maps of space and images of the Cephal civilization filled the screens. But the focus was on one image. A young Cephal named Kale, lying in a medical bed, recovering from wounds he had taken protecting a human child. "This changes everything," said Ambassador Elisa Parker, the UN Secretary General. She had been appointed 6 months earlier, and this was her first real test. "If the Cephal are willing to protect our people, we cannot ignore that. We have to respond." The Russian representative was skeptical. This could be propaganda. A single individual does not speak for an entire civilization. "Then we find out," General Morrison said. She had a calm voice, but her eyes were hard. "We send a response. We send help. We show the galaxy that humanity does not forget those who stand with us." Within hours, the news spread across Earth. Emma's face was on every screen. The story of the Cephal who saved her was broadcast in every language. News agencies struggled to explain what this meant. Humanity had contact with an advanced civilization, yes. But the story was not about technology or trade. It was about courage and compassion. The public response was overwhelming. In New York, millions of people gathered in the streets. In Beijing, Tokyo, London, and São Paulo, the same scenes played out. People held signs. Some called for friendship with the Cephal. Others called for military response against those who had attacked the outpost. But all of them agreed on one thing. Kale had done something remarkable, and Earth would not forget. Emma appeared in an interview with one of the major news networks. She was 7 years old, and she did not understand politics or diplomacy. But she understood what mattered. "Kale was nice to me," she said simply. "He saved me from the bad people. I want to thank him." That clip was seen by 4 billion people in the first 24 hours. Henry sent a second message from Vethra. Kale was conscious now. The young Cephal had asked about Emma. Henry had brought the child to see him, and they had sat together in silence. Two young beings from different species, who had been through something that would connect them forever. Henry described the moment in his message. "I have never seen anything like it," he wrote. "There was no language barrier. There was no species difference. There was only recognition. Two children who had met in the worst moment and would now be connected in the best way." Kale did not hesitate to put his life on the line for Emma. This is not an alien act. This is a human act. This is what defines us both. The U decided to act. General Morrison presented her proposal to the Security Council. It was radical. It was unprecedented. But it was, she argued, the only response that matched the scale of what Kale had done. "We will formally declare the entire Cephal species under Earth's protective shield," Morrison said. She looked at each representative in turn. "Any attack on the Cephal will be considered an attack on humanity. Our military will stand ready to defend them. We will make it clear to the entire galaxy that those who show compassion to our people will have our loyalty in return." The room fell silent. This was not a small gesture. This was a military commitment. This was putting Earth's resources on the line for an alien species that most humans had never even heard of until 3 days ago. "General, this is madness," the Russian representative said. "We do not have the capability to defend another species across the galaxy." "We do not know what capabilities we have," Morrison replied. "But I know this. If we do not respond to courage, we do not deserve to be among the stars." The vote took 2 hours. Debates raged. Some representatives called it humanity overreaching. Others called it the greatest act of solidarity in human history. In the end, the vote was close. 9 in favor, 3 opposed, and 2 abstaining. It was enough. The decision was made. Earth would make a declaration to the galaxy. A species would be born into a new role in the cosmic community. And it would happen because one young alien had chosen to protect a human child. As news reached Vethra, Cale lay in his medical bed and asked to see Emma again. Henry brought her, and she held the Cephal's hand. Neither of them knew that their moment of connection had changed the course of history. They only knew that they had found a friend. On Earth, General Patricia Morrison looked at the maps of space. She thought about the long-term implications of what they had just decided. Then she thought about Emma and Cale, two children who had met across the stars. That, she told herself, was worth any risk. The Cephal Council of Elders met in the great chamber beneath their oldest city. 37 of them sat in a circle, members of a civilization that had existed for 200,000 years. They had seen species rise and fall. They had watched empires expand and collapse. They had maintained their independence and their dignity through every crisis. And now, they had to respond to something no one had anticipated. Vorth stood before them and explained what had happened on Vethra. He spoke about the attack, about the human child, and about Cale's actions. The chamber was silent. Some of the elders seemed confused. Others seemed disturbed. A young member of the Cephal species, putting himself in danger for a creature from a primitive world. It violated their principles of non-interference. It suggested chaos in their society. This young one broke protocol, one of the elders said. He endangered himself for a creature he had no responsibility toward. Yes, Vorth agreed. But he did it anyway. And now Earth has responded. When Vorth explained Earth's declaration, the reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some elders stood up, speaking all at once. Others were stone silent, processing the implications. The Cephal did not need Earth's protection. They had power and technology far beyond what humans could imagine. But the gesture was so strange, so unexpected, that it forced them to think about something they had avoided for thousands of years. About what did it mean when a younger species chose to stand with them? What did it mean when humans decided that loyalty and compassion mattered more than power? One of the oldest elders, a Cephal named Theron, who was nearly 400 years old, spoke quietly. This is not an insult. This is a gift. A gift wrapped in something we have forgotten how to give. You mean compassion? Another elder asked. I mean choice, Theron said. We have lived so long and become so powerful that we have forgotten that young species can choose to stand beside us. We have become distant. But this human has seen value in us worth protecting. The debate continued for hours. Some elders wanted to reject the declaration outright, to claim that the Cephal did not need or want humanity's protection. Others wanted to accept it and use Earth's military support to their advantage. A few, a very small few, wanted to recognize it for what it truly was. A moment of change. Meanwhile, Henry Chun was working as an unofficial ambassador. The Cephal government had not appointed him officially, but they had allowed him to speak. He gave interviews to Cephal media, explaining why humanity had made this choice. He did not use complicated words. He kept it simple. A person from our species saved the life of a child from our species, Henry said. That is enough. We do not need reasons beyond that. We do not need strategic advantage or technological benefit. Compassion is reason enough. The Cephal media was shocked by this simplicity. They were used to complex political reasoning, to centuries of careful planning and consideration. But Henry's words had a power that their careful logic did not. They reached people. Back on Vethra, young Cephal began gathering outside Cale's medical facility. They brought things. Small gifts, messages. Many of them were the same age as Cale or younger, and they saw him as a hero. He had done something brave. He had done something right. The older generation's careful rules had not stopped them, and for that, a generation of young Sethel felt inspired. News spread throughout the galaxy. The Crystalline Collective, an alien species of living crystals that communicated through light waves, opened diplomatic channels to Earth for the first time. The Corvan Empire, warriors who respected only strength, expressed confusion about why humans would protect a species not their own. The Intergalactic Council called for clarification about Earth's intentions. To each of these species, humanity sent the same message. We have chosen to stand with the Sethel because they chose to stand with us. This is not about military power or political strategy. This is about values. Henry traveled back to Earth for official meetings with the UN Security Council and with General Morrison. He brought with him recordings of Kale, videos of the young Sethel recovering, and letters from Sethel citizens thanking humanity. He also brought Emma's drawings. She had drawn pictures of Kale in her hospital room, crude drawings with bright colors, showing her and Kale holding hands beneath the sun. This is why we did this, Henry said, showing the drawings to the council. Not because we want power, but because we want our children to grow up knowing that kindness matters, that loyalty matters, that we have the strength to protect those we care about. General Morrison looked at the drawings for a long time. She was a military officer, trained to think about tactics and strategy. But she understood something deeper. Sometimes the strongest choice was the choice to care. The Sethel government finally made their announcement. They would accept Earth's declaration. Not because they needed the protection, they said carefully, but because they recognized the meaning behind it. The two species would form a formal alliance. Technology would be shared. Cooperation would begin. But more importantly, Kale would be recognized not as someone who broke their rules, but as someone who showed them what they had been missing. A young Sethel who reminded his entire civilization that compassion was strength, not weakness. When Kale was fully healed, he was invited to speak before both the Sethel Council and Earth's assembly simultaneously through quantum communication technology. He was nervous. He was young and had never intended to become important. He had only meant to help a child, but as he spoke, his words were simple and clear. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped them. I did not know it would change anything. I only knew it was right. And now I understand that humans, who are so much younger than us, know something we had forgotten. They know that doing the right thing is more important than following the rules. I am proud that my civilization has chosen to remember this with our new friends. When Kale finished speaking, the chambers on both worlds were silent. Then the applause came. Not the formal applause of diplomacy, but real, genuine recognition. A young being from two different species had reminded them all what they were supposed to be. January 15th, 2157. The date would be marked in history books on a dozen worlds. The United Nations of Earth made its formal declaration to the galaxy. Every news network broadcast it simultaneously. Every space station picked up the transmission. Every species with the capability to receive it heard the message. General Patricia Morrison stood before the cameras on Earth. Behind her, the flags of every nation on the planet hung in a line. She wore her dress uniform, but her voice was not military. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision that would echo through time. To all beings and all civilizations in the galaxy, she began. Earth makes this declaration. We are a young species. We have only recently joined the community of the stars. But in this short time, we have learned something important. There is a species called the Sethel. They have taught us a lesson about courage and compassion. They protected one of our own when they could have turned away. Therefore, Earth declares that the entire Sethel species is now under humanity's protective shield. The words were formal, but their meaning was clear. She continued, any attack on the Sethel will be considered an attack on Earth. Any threat to their cities, their worlds, their citizens will be met with the full military response of the United Nations. We do not make this declaration because the Cephal need our protection. We make it because they have shown us that compassion is worth protecting. They have shown us that loyalty matters. And we are returning their gift with a gift of our own. Morrison paused. She looked directly into the camera. We are young, but we are not weak. We are still learning, but we are learning fast. The galaxy may have underestimated us. That will not happen again. The transmission ended. The room on Earth erupted in applause. But the real reactions came from across the stars. The Crystalline Collective sent an official response within hours. They had never been close allies with humanity, but they recognized strength when they saw it. We acknowledge Earth's commitment. We accept humanity as a formal ally. It was brief, but to alien diplomats it was profoundly important. The Corvan Empire's response was different. They were warriors who respected only warriors. When they heard about Earth's declaration, they began military exercises in their border regions. They wanted to test humanity's claims. If Earth was willing to back up its words, the Corvan would know. If not, they would make a move against the Cephal themselves. General Morrison expected this. She had already ordered the deployment of Earth's newest defense fleet to Cephal space. The ship classes had names that reflected humanity's history and values. The lead ship was called the Independence. Others included the Resolution, the Endeavor, the Peace, and the Perseverance. They carried technology that humans had developed in isolation, working on problems that only a young species would face. The jump engines that powered these ships operated on principles that older civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. Earth scientists had rediscovered them through pure necessity. When the hyperdrive technology from the Cephal had proven too complex for human factories to manufacture reliably, humans had been forced to innovate. The result was technology that was different. Not necessarily better in every way, but different enough to surprise the galaxy. When the Earth fleet entered Cephal space, the response from other civilizations was immediate. The Intergalactic Council demanded to know Earth's intentions. The Corvan Empire moved closer to their borders. Every alien species with advanced sensors watched as humanity deployed what was, for them, an unknown force. The Cephal government issued an official statement. They had accepted Earth's protection. The two species were now formal allies. Any action against the Cephal would be considered an action against both the Cephal and Earth. It was a statement that changed the balance of power in the Kaurisivani galaxy overnight. The Corvan Empire, in response, backed down. They did not flee, but they stopped their aggressive posturing. They had tested humanity's resolve, and humans had answered clearly. The Corvan respected that other species began to reach out to Earth, not in friendship yet, but in curiosity. Young civilizations that had been overlooked for centuries suddenly saw that one of their own had made a difference. If Earth could declare the Cephal under its protection based on one act of compassion, what could other young species accomplish? On Vethra, the reaction was more emotional. The Cephal people watched as human ships entered their orbit. They were not weapons of invasion. They were weapons of defense. And they were there for one reason. Because the Cephal had shown compassion, and Earth had remembered that. Kale watched from his recovery room as the ships passed overhead. A young Cephal nurse stood beside him. "Is this frightening?" she asked. She was referring to the human warships, to the idea of depending on another civilization for protection. "No," Kale said. "It is beautiful. They are saying that what I did mattered. They are saying that kindness matters." The nurse said nothing, but her eyes showed understanding. The older generation of Cephal might struggle with what had happened, but the young ones understood. This was not weakness. This was strength. Real strength. Henry Chun was appointed as Earth's official ambassador to the Cephal. It was not a political appointment in the traditional sense. It was recognition of what he had already become. The human who understood the Cephal. The man who had been there when everything changed. His first official act was to create the Kale Foundation for Cross-Species Understanding. The foundation would provide scholarships for young Cephal and humans to study together, to learn from each other, to build the next generation of alliance. Emma was the first human ambassador of the foundation. Though at 7 years old, her job was simply to be herself. To show that human children and Cephal children could be friends. The Galactic News Agency struggled to explain what had happened. The Old Order, where a few ancient species dominated through superior technology and knowledge, had been disrupted. A young species with only basic space capability had declared itself the protector of an ancient civilization. Some analysts said it was the greatest act of confidence in galactic history. Others said it was madness. But everyone agreed on one thing. Earth had changed the game. General Morrison stood in the command center of the space station that now served as headquarters for the Joint Earth-Cephal Defense Initiative. She looked at the displays showing the fleet positions, the monitor stations, the defense grids being established. She thought about Kale, a young alien who had simply done what was right. And she thought about Emma, a human child who had learned that the universe was bigger and kinder than she had imagined. "We did the right thing," she said quietly to herself. Around her, officers nodded. Whether they understood the full depth of what she meant, she did not know. But they had understood enough. The declaration had been made. The shield was in place. And the galaxy had learned that humanity, though young, was worthy of standing among the stars. 10 years had passed since that day on Vethra when everything changed. The research outpost where the attack had happened was rebuilt, but now it served a different purpose. It was a bridge between two worlds, a place where humans and Cephal worked together, studied together, and lived together. Henry Chun was no longer the same man who had watched his daughter play with blocks in an alien city. He was older now, his hair turning gray, but his eyes held something new, certainty. He had been right to believe that humans belonged among the stars. And more than that, he had been right to believe that kindness was a weapon more powerful than any technology. Emma was 17 years old now. She was no longer the frightened child who had clung to her father's hand during the attack. She was a student at the new Academy of Earth-Cephal Relations, an institution that had been built specifically to train the next generation of both species to work together. The Academy was located on a space station orbiting Vethra, neutral ground where young beings from both worlds could study alongside each other. Emma walked through the Academy corridors with a Cephal student named Lyra. Lyra was a young Cephal, the same age as Emma, and they had been friends since the Academy had opened. They discussed their studies, their futures, and the world around them. They were not the first humans in Cephal to become friends, but they represented what the Alliance had created. A generation that could not imagine a world where these species were separate. Kale worked now at the Kale Foundation, though he no longer appeared in public as frequently as he once had. He was uncomfortable with his status as a hero. He preferred to work behind the scenes, helping to create educational programs and research opportunities. When people asked him about the day of the attack, he always gave the same answer. "I did what was right," he would say. "I did not do it to be famous. I did it because she was a child and she needed help." The fact that people remember it is strange to me, but if it helps other young ones learn that kindness is strength, then I am glad. The technology exchange that had followed the declaration had transformed both civilizations. The Cephal had shared their understanding of quantum mechanics and dimensional physics. Humans had shared their engineering efficiency and their ability to work with limited resources. The combination had produced technologies that neither species could have created alone. Joint Research stations appeared around the Cephal system. Humans and Cephal scientists worked together on medical research, energy production, and transportation. Young humans studied Cephal history and culture. Young Cephal studied human art, music, and literature. The impact on the broader galaxy was profound. Other young species looked at what humanity had accomplished and began demanding recognition and respect. The Gorvan, a species that had been ignored by the major powers for centuries, made contact with Earth. The Tenji, a peaceful species that lived on water worlds, requested alliance negotiations. The Old Order, where a few ancient civilizations dominated, was changing. The Crystalline Collective, which had recognized Earth's strength years earlier, became a regular trading partner. The Colvan Empire, respecting humans as warriors, began military cooperation. Even species that had initially been skeptical of humanity came to understand that humans were not a threat. They were something new. General Patricia Morrison had retired from the military. She was 75 years old now, and she had decided to focus on diplomatic work rather than defense. She worked for the United Nations in the newly created Department of Galactic Relations. She still thought about the young Cephal who had changed everything, and about the human child who had been saved. "Do you ever regret it?" a younger officer asked her once. He was referring to the decision to declare the Cephal under Earth's protection. It had been bold. It had been risky. Morrison smiled. No, that was the moment when humanity stopped being a species trying to prove itself to the galaxy. That was the moment when we proved to ourselves that we knew what we were supposed to be. Emma and Cale met for a meal at a restaurant in the outpost. It was a special place that served both human and Cephal food. Emma had become skilled at understanding Cephal culture and dietary needs. Cale had developed a taste for human food, though his physiology could only process certain elements. "I have been offered a position in the government," Cale told her. "They want me to work on policy for young species that are just entering the galactic community. They think my experience makes me valuable." Emma smiled. "Because it does. You changed the galaxy, Cale. A lot of people forget that." "No," Cale said. "Your father changed the galaxy. He told a story. He made people understand. I only did what was right." This was the difference between them, Emma thought. Cale would never fully understand how significant he had been. He had simply acted on instinct and compassion. For Cale, there was nothing remarkable about that. It was what you did when a child was in danger. Simple, clear, obvious. But humans understood that such simplicity was actually profound. Emma had spent her childhood learning this lesson from her father. The Academy held a ceremony to mark the 10th anniversary of the Declaration. Students from Earth and the Cephal worlds gathered in the main auditorium. Henry Chun spoke about that day on Vethra, about watching a young alien protect his daughter. He did not describe it as a great act. He described it as what it truly was. One being saw another being in danger and acted, he said. That was all it was. But that simple action showed us something important. It showed us that compassion is not a weakness. It showed us that kindness is strength. It showed us that we are not alone in understanding what matters. He looked at Emma and Cale sitting together in the audience. This alliance was not built on technology or military power. It was built on the recognition that when someone shows us that they care about us, we care about them in return. The Cephal protected a human child. So Earth protected all Cephal. That is how bonds are built. That is how civilization advances. The speech was broadcast to every world. It was simple and direct, and it carried the weight of truth in the months and years that followed. The alliance between Earth and the Cephal continued to grow. Universities opened joint programs. Trade networks expanded. Young beings studied together, worked together, and created a future that neither species could have created alone. But the most important thing was quieter and less visible. It was the simple knowledge that existed in the minds of millions of young beings. A being could be different and still deserve protection. A being could be from another world and still be worthy of friendship. Compassion was not weakness. It was the strongest force that existed. Cale wrote in his personal journal during the 15th anniversary of the Declaration. I made a choice one day to protect a child. I never expected it to mean anything beyond that moment. But now I understand that sometimes single moments matter more than all the years that come after them. That day, I learned that humanity was not weak or foolish. I learned that they understood something we had forgotten. They understood that every life has value, and they were willing to risk everything to prove it. I am grateful that I was the one who showed them this value, and I am grateful that they responded the way they did. The galaxy is better because humanity is in it. General Patricia Morrison passed away at the age of 93. She had lived long enough to see what she had helped create grow beyond anything she had imagined. At her funeral, both humans and Cethel came to pay respect. Emma and Cale stood together, two beings from different worlds who had become symbols of what was possible. The galaxy had changed. Not because of weapons or because of superior technology. It had changed because one young being had chosen to be kind. And another species had chosen to remember that kindness was worth everything taught in schools on a dozen worlds. Children learned the story. But the most important part of the story was not the Declaration or the defense fleet or the diplomatic negotiations. The most important part was what Henry Chun had always known. One act of compassion was enough. One being protecting another being was enough. That was where it all started. That was the beginning of everything that came after, and it would continue, generation after generation, as long as beings remembered that protecting the innocent was worth any cost.